I hope some of you recognise that we are using a different mass setting this morning. My thanks to Lyndon for recording a setting of the Missa Simplex, as it's called, which is one that we quite often use at St Faith's. We thought a bit of variation might be fun, so I hope you enjoyed that. Hands up if you want to know what the future holds. Yeah? Well, I can't see whether you've got your hands up on the camera, but I'm willing to bet that many of you did put them up, or at least put them up in your heads. Most of us want to know the future. It's pretty much ingrained in our human nature, isn't it? Farmers, when they plant their crops, want to know what the weather's going to be while those crops are growing and whether their crops will succeed. Armies marching to war want to know if they're going to win. Investors in the stock market are obsessed with knowing what's going to happen. There's even an entire range of speculative stocks known as futures, where you essentially bet on what's going to happen in the future. And people living through a pandemic really want to know, especially parents for whom homeschooling has really lost its appeal. Or homeless people who have been given a home during the pandemic but now face real uncertainty. Or NHS staff who are desperately hoping that the hordes on our beaches in the last week won't trigger another pandemic for them to cope with. I wish that I could see into the future right now, because then I would know how to advise the PCC and all of you about when the right time to open our church to the public would be. This deep need to know the future was no less real for our ancestors. And so prophets and soothsayers who claimed that they could see the future were given really high status in their communities. Kings consulted them and religious leaders listened to them. Sometimes. Personally, I'm a little bit suspicious of anyone who tells me that they can definitely see into the future, specifically and definitely, as though they have a television screen that will show them exactly what the future is like. And I noticed that even those biblical prophets who claimed to see the future would describe it in rather vague or metaphorical terms. Armies of scholars have debated for centuries what Daniel meant by the abomination of desolation standing in the temple, or what John the Revelator meant by his lurid descriptions of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, or the battle of Armageddon, or the whore of Babylon. Even his glorious vision of a new Jerusalem descending from heaven feels rather more like poetry than factual description, doesn't it? You see, there are essentially two kinds of prophets. First, there are these foretellers, the ones who claim to have seen or been given a specific vision of what the future will be like, or how specific events are going to unfold. But the second kind of prophet is a forth-teller. That is, someone who tells forth the teachings and wisdom of God in a given situation. They are the ones who warn the people of the consequences of their actions. Listen up. If you carry on living the way that you are living, then bad things are going to happen. Some of the Hebrew Bible's prophets went to some extreme lengths to get their forth-telling across to the people. I love the story of Hosea, for example, who deliberately married what we would call a sex worker to create a visual aid to the people. Look, he was saying, effectively, I, a prophet of God, have married an unfaithful woman to show you that you have been unfaithful to God. I wondered about trying a similar visual aid for one of my sermons, but Claire said that I wasn't allowed. Sometimes the people would listen to the warnings of the prophets. Take Jonah, for example. He did everything that he could to avoid telling the people of Nineveh that they were sinful and about to be punished. But God insisted and even sent a great fish to take him to Nineveh. Eventually, Jonah plucked up the courage to warn the people that they were all doomed. And guess what? They actually listened to him. The king put on sackcloth and ashes. The people repented, and the Lord decided not to wipe Nineveh from the face of the earth. Now, Jonah was not happy. Having finally delivered his end of the world message, he wanted God to go through with it. But that's a story for another day. St. Paul described prophecy as one of the greater gifts, and he advised the Corinthians to earnestly desire the gift of prophecy. And that's because I think that to be a really effective prophet, a great deal of wisdom is required. Today's prophets are those like our climatologists, who on the basis of all the knowledge and wisdom they've accumulated about our climate, predict an awful future for us if we don't change the ways we live. Most pertinently right now, epidemiologists are another kind of wise prophet. Their years of study and accumulated wisdom enable them to forecast the effects of the various social measures that we're subject to at the moment. The prophets of the Bible often struggle to make their voices heard by the decision makers of their day. And we too have discovered that the dire warnings of scientists about COVID-19 are not always taken fully on board by politicians, who, to be fair to them, have a wider responsibility to the economy and to the electorate. The big task for the church right now is to prophesy what the future of our worship and community life is going to be. This is no easy task, for we must listen to the wise prophets of epidemiology, as well as the heartfelt desire of our parishioners and ourselves to re-enter the church. What I think we can prophesy fairly accurately is that nothing will ever be quite the same in the future. But whatever our future holds, we know that God walks into it with us, hand in hand. Amen. Let us declare our faith together in the words of the Creed.